Before we begin tonight's episode of Data and Dissonance, we need to be very clear about something. Because the headlines are hot, the politics are nuclear, and everybody online is already swinging before the facts have even finished walking into the courtroom. Tonight, we are talking about federal indictments, public officials, political speech, COVID-era records, institutional trust, and the very uncomfortable question of whether the same people who told Americans to stop asking questions are now being forced to answer some of their own. But an indictment is not a conviction. Charges are allegations. Every person discussed tonight is presumed innocent, unless and until proven guilty in a court of law. That matters even when the accused person is someone you dislike. That matters even when the story confirms something you've suspected for years. And that matters especially when the country is already divided into two camps. One side that thinks every charge against their enemies is justice, and one side that thinks every charge against their allies is persecution. This episode may include strong opinions, political criticism, sarcasm, uncomfortable questions, and the kind of institutional side-eye that makes cable news producers reach for their emergency pearls. We are not here to threaten anyone, encourage violence, celebrate prosecution as entertainment, or pretend that courtroom allegations are the same thing as final truth. We are here to examine the public record, talk through what these indictments mean, and ask why so many Americans no longer trust the people who spent years demanding trust from them. So buckle up, keep your brain turned on, keep your tribal reflexes in check, and remember, accountability only means something if it applies even when it's inconvenient.
2 indictments hit the political bloodstream this week, and just like that, the country got another reminder that the people who used to sit behind microphones, podiums, congressional tables, agency letterheads, and cable news panels are no longer just shaping the headlines. Some of them are becoming the headlines. On one side, you have former FBI Director James Comey, indicted over a social media post involving the numbers 8647, with prosecutors arguing it could be interpreted as a serious threat against President Trump, while Comey says it was not a threat, not violent, and not criminal. And let's be honest, that case is going to light up the First Amendment debate like somebody threw a road flare into a gas station bathroom. Because whether you like Comey or can't stand the guy, the question is not just, did he post something stupid? The question is whether the government can prove a true threat, or whether this becomes another courtroom knife fight over political speech, symbolism, intent, and whether the justice system is being used as a referee or a weapon. But then there's the second indictment, and this one may not have the same cable news flashbang effect, but it might actually be the bigger institutional earthquake. David Morens, a former senior NIAID official and longtime advisor in Fauci's orbit, has been indicted over allegations tied to federal records, FOIA requests, COVID research grants, and communications the government says were intentionally hidden from public view. And that one hits different, because for years Americans were told that questions about COVID origins, research funding, public health transparency, and what officials knew behind closed doors were dangerous, conspiratorial, anti-science, irresponsible, and basically the intellectual equivalent of licking a gas pump during flu season. But now we have an indictment saying, in essence, there may have been people inside the system working to conceal records, evade disclosure, and keep conversations out of reach of the public that was paying for the whole thing. And that is the thread tonight. Not convict them now, not throw everyone in jail, not our side good, their side bad, even though I know Brian is already vibrating in the corner like a bald eagle hooked to jumper cables. The thread tonight is trust. Because for years, Americans were told to trust the FBI, trust the DOJ, trust the experts, trust the public health bureaucracy, trust the institutions, trust the same people who are often caught giving lectures instead of answers. And now here we are, staring at 2 very different indictments that both point back to the same ugly question. What happens when the people who demanded blind trust are forced to stand under the same lights they used to shine on everyone else? Because this is bigger than Comey. It is bigger than Morens. It is bigger than Fauci's inner circle, Trump's enemies, COVID records, Instagram posts, or whatever word salad the Sunday shows are going to cook up and serve with a side of manufactured outrage. This is about whether the American people still believe the system has one standard, one law, one process, and one expectation of honesty, or whether we are watching a country where justice depends on your last name, your party, your agency badge, your media usefulness, and whether you are on the approved side of the narrative when the narrative mattered most. So tonight we are going to talk about the Comey indictment, the Morens indictment, the Fauci connection, the COVID paper trail, the First Amendment landmine, the institutional double standard, and the one thing Washington fears more than subpoenas, hearings, or angry voters: receipts. Because eventually the emails come out, eventually the posts get archived, eventually the records surface, eventually the people who told you there was nothing to see start acting real nervous when somebody asks to see it. This is Data Dissonance. I'm Artie, and tonight's episode is called The Accountability Clock. Because for years, the powerful told America to stop asking questions. Now the clock is ticking. All right, let's bring in the crew, because tonight we are dealing with one of those stories where every single person at this table is going to see a different piece of the same cracked mirror. Brian is here, which means the MAGA smoke detector is already chirping, the coffee is probably scared, and somewhere a CNN producer just felt a disturbance in the force. Brian is going to look at this through the lens of what a lot of Trump supporters have been saying for years, that the people who investigated, lectured, censored, dismissed, and accused everyone else are suddenly discovering what it feels like when the spotlight swings back their direction. Rachel is here too, and Rachel is going to do what Rachel does best: slow the room down, just enough to keep us from turning the courtroom into a football stadium. She is going to remind us that indictments are serious, that evidence matters, that political prosecutions are dangerous if they are sloppy, and that public trust is not rebuilt by simply flipping the weapon around and pointing it at the other side. And honestly, we need that voice tonight because this story is spicy enough to melt the paint off the walls. And I do not need Brian jumping up on the desk screaming, "Receipts!" like he just found Hillary's printer in a pawn shop. Daniel is here, which means there is already a red string board somewhere in the studio. And I'm not saying he brought thumbtacks, but I'm also not saying I checked his pockets. Daniel is going to look at the connective tissue here: federal power, public records, agency culture, FOIA, narrative control, the way institutions protect themselves, and how the phrase "trust the science" somehow turned into "please don't ask for the emails." And on the Comey side, Daniel is probably going to ask whether this is accountability, retaliation, or one more sign that the justice system is now operating like a political seesaw with subpoenas attached. And of course, Skylar is here, because if we are going to talk about government power, COVID transparency, prosecution, and political speech, we need the voice at the table that is going to challenge everyone's comfort zone. Skylar is not going to let conservatives cheer every indictment just because the target is someone they do not like. She is going to ask whether we actually believe in due process, free speech, and restraint, or whether we only believe in those things when our side is wearing the handcuffs. And I'll tell you right now, that may annoy some of you, but it is exactly why she's here. Because if your principles only work when they help your team, they are not principles, they are campaign slogans with better lighting. So tonight we are doing one big Thursday segment. We are going to start with Comey because that one is flashy, emotional, and loaded with First Amendment dynamite. Then we are going to move into David Morens, the former senior NIAID official and Fauci advisor accused of concealing federal records tied to COVID-era research transparency. DOJ says Comey was indicted over the 8647 Instagram post, while Morens was indicted over alleged efforts to evade FOIA requests and conceal federal records during the pandemic. Both cases are allegations, and both men are presumed innocent unless proven guilty. And the question underneath all of it is simple. Is America finally seeing accountability? Or are we watching the justice system become the next battlefield in a country that no longer trusts the referee? Let's start with James Comey, because whether you like him, hate him, or still have emotional scar tissue from 2016 every time his name pops up, this indictment is going to be one of those stories where the facts, the politics, and the legal standards all crash into each other at full speed. Comey was indicted after posting an image of seashells arranged as 8647, with DOJ arguing that a reasonable person familiar with the circumstances could read that as a serious expression of intent to harm President Trump, the 47th president. Comey says that was not his intent, that he saw it as a political message, and that he removed the post once he realized people were interpreting it as violent. AP and Reuters both report that legal experts are already warning the case may face major First Amendment problems because prosecutors have to prove more than bad taste, more than symbolism, more than ugly politics. They have to prove a true threat. And here's where I'm going to say something that might make both sides mad, which usually means we are somewhere near the truth. I do not like the post. I think 8647 was reckless, stupid, and absolutely guaranteed to pour gasoline on a country already standing next to a bonfire. We have had assassination attempts, threats, political violence, online lunatics, and way too many people casually throwing around language like they are ordering off a menu instead of talking about human beings. So yes, I think the post was irresponsible. But irresponsible and criminal are not the same thing. A dumb political post is not automatically a federal threat case. If the government is going to charge a former FBI director with threatening a sitting president, the evidence better be airtight, because if it is not, this turns into a gift-wrapped political persecution narrative with a bow on top and a cable news subscription included. That said, there is also a double standard issue here that nobody wants to touch without putting on gloves. For years, regular Americans have been visited, investigated, deplatformed, flagged, monitored, and treated like potential extremists for things they said online. Sometimes ugly things, sometimes stupid things, sometimes jokes, sometimes legitimate concerns wrapped in bad wording. So when someone like Comey posts something that millions of people see as threatening, people naturally ask, would an average truck driver, veteran, small business owner, or fired-up grandpa on Facebook get the same generous interpretation? Would the media call it protected speech? Would the DOJ tread carefully? Would legal experts suddenly discover nuance? Or would they drag that guy through the mud before breakfast and call him a domestic threat by lunch? So Brian, I want to start with you. When you see Comey indicted over that 8647 post, do you see overdue accountability? Or do you worry that this case might be legally weak even if the post itself was disgusting?
Artie, I'm going to be honest. When I first saw this story, my first reaction was not legal theory. It was not constitutional nuance. It was not some fancy law school debate with people saying true threat while sipping $7 coffee. My first reaction was, well, look who finally found out the internet has consequences. Because for years, conservatives have watched powerful people say dangerous, ugly, inflammatory things about Trump, about his supporters, about half the country, and somehow it always gets brushed off as resistance language, metaphor, satire, art, protest, democracy, or whatever polished little excuse they slap on it before sending it to MSNBC for dry cleaning. But if some regular MAGA guy in a hat had posted a coded phrase that the media decided meant harm toward a Democrat president, do you think anybody would be asking whether he meant it symbolically? No chance. They would have his face on every screen. They would be interviewing his third-grade teacher, and they would have a panel of experts explaining how his lawn decorations were warning signs. Now, legally, I get what you're saying. The government has to prove its case. The First Amendment matters. I do not want a country where every dumb post becomes a felony just because somebody powerful pretends to be afraid. But here's the part that burns people up. Comey was not some random idiot with a keyboard. This guy ran the FBI. He knows what signals mean. He knows what threat assessments look like. He knows exactly how law enforcement reads context, timing, symbolism, and public reaction. So when he posts 8647, he does not get to act like he accidentally spilled alphabet soup into a political assassination debate. He may not be guilty of a crime, that is for the court, but he knew better. And when people who built the modern lecture machine suddenly want grace, context, and benefit of the doubt, conservatives have every right to say, "Where was that energy when you were treating us like suspects for questioning school boards, masks, elections, censorship, borders, and corruption?" And this is why people are cheering, even if some lawyers are nervous. They are not just cheering the indictment, they are cheering the idea that the untouchables might finally be touchable. They are cheering because the same class that spent years calling Trump supporters dangerous is now being asked to explain its own language. They are cheering because the people who told everyone else that words are violence now want everyone to remember that words are also protected speech. Well, pick a lane. If speech is sacred, then defend it for everyone. If threats are serious, then apply the standard to everyone. But do not tell me that a grandmother at a school board meeting is a threat to democracy, while a former FBI director posting 8647 is just a misunderstood beachcombing philosopher with a shell collection in bad timing.
Brian, that's exactly where the public frustration comes from. It is not just Comey. It is the sense that high-status people get interpretation and regular people get investigation. High-status people get context. Regular people get patterns of radicalization. High-status people get op-eds about nuance. Regular people get local news helicopters over their driveway. And whether Comey's indictment survives or collapses, that double-standard anger is real, because people have watched language policing become selective depending on who is speaking and who the target is. But I also think this is where conservatives have to be careful, because if the Comey case is weak, then cheering it too hard can backfire. If it gets dismissed, the media will not say, maybe Comey posted something reckless, but the legal standard was too high. They will say, Trump's DOJ tried to prosecute a political enemy and failed. And then the whole conversation shifts away from the reckless post and toward overreach. That is why accountability has to be done cleanly. It cannot be vibes. It cannot be revenge theater. It cannot be, they did it to us, so now we do it to them. Because once that becomes the standard, the Constitution turns into a mood ring, and nobody should want that. Rachel, let me bring you in here because you're usually the one who reminds us that the courtroom is not a comment section. When you look at the Comey indictment, do you see justice moving forward, or do you see a risky case that could damage the credibility of legitimate accountability efforts?
I see both the emotional appeal and the legal danger, and that is why this story is so volatile. On the emotional side, I understand why many conservatives are saying, finally. They have watched political rhetoric against Trump become increasingly dark, increasingly casual, and increasingly normalized by people who would instantly condemn similar language if it were aimed at someone on their side. There is a real concern in this country about the way public figures speak when tensions are already high, and a former FBI director should absolutely understand that certain symbols and phrases can carry consequences. Comey was not operating in a vacuum. He was operating in a country where political violence has already become part of the national fear cycle. So, I do not think people are wrong to be angry about the post, and I do not think people are wrong to ask whether a less powerful person would have been treated more harshly. But legally, this is a much tougher road than the outrage suggests. The standard for prosecuting threats against public officials is not supposed to be, a lot of people interpreted it badly. It has to be a serious expression of intent to harm, and intent matters. That does not mean the post was smart. It does not mean it was harmless. It does not mean Comey deserves applause or sympathy. It just means that in America, we do not criminalize every reckless political statement unless it crosses a specific constitutional line. That line exists for a reason, because every administration, left, right, or otherwise, would love to have the power to decide that hostile political speech is really a threat. Once that door opens too wide, it will not just be used against former FBI directors. It will be used against activists, comedians, podcasters, protesters, veterans, parents, and ordinary people who say something dumb at the wrong time. So the danger here is that a weak prosecution can actually protect the very people the public wants held accountable. If the case fails, Comey gets to claim vindication. Democrats get to scream political persecution. And the larger institutional trust problem gets buried under the easier headline of Trump revenge case collapses. That does not mean prosecutors should never bring a hard case. It means they better bring a strong one. Because if the real issue is rebuilding public trust, then sloppy justice is not justice. It is ammunition. And right now, the country is so starved for accountability that people are tempted to celebrate the indictment before the evidence has even been tested. But that is exactly the emotional trap that powerful institutions have used against ordinary Americans for years.
Rachel, that's the part that matters. The case can be emotionally satisfying and legally fragile at the same time. Both things can be true. And that is one of the biggest problems with political media right now. Everybody wants a clean cartoon. They want the villain, the hero, the hammer, the courtroom door slam, the dramatic music, and the chyron that says, justice. But real justice is slower and messier than that. It has rules. It has standards. It has burdens of proof. It has annoying constitutional protections that apply even to people you cannot stand. And honestly, I think this is where the show has to be honest with our own audience. We can criticize Comey. We can say the post was reckless. We can say the double standard is obvious. We can say regular people would probably never get this much nuance from the media. But we also have to say that if this prosecution is not strong enough, it could damage the broader accountability push. Because the next story, the Morens indictment, is where the receipts may matter a whole lot more than the symbolism. Daniel, let's shift from Comey's post to the institutional paper trail. David Morens, former senior NIAID official, former advisor in Fauci's circle, indicted over allegations tied to FOIA, federal records, and COVID research communications. When you look at that case, does this feel like the bigger story hiding behind the louder headline?
Yes, and this is where the room should get quieter, not louder, because the Morens indictment is not just about one man, one email account, or one bureaucrat who allegedly got sloppy with records. This goes straight into the machinery of public trust during one of the most consequential periods in modern American history. The government is alleging that a senior NIAID figure participated in a scheme to evade Freedom of Information Act requests, conceal federal records, and hide communications connected to COVID-era research grants and the origins debate. That is not a small administrative issue. That is the public's right to know crashing into the private habits of people who were helping shape the national story. While the country was locked down, masked up, divided, censored, fired, shamed, and told to stop asking questions. And the reason this matters so much is because FOIA is not some boring paperwork tool for nerds with too many highlighters. FOIA is one of the only ways ordinary citizens, journalists, watchdogs, and lawmakers can pry open the government when the government would rather stay closed. So if the allegations are true, and again they have to be proven, then this was not merely bad optics. This would mean someone inside the public health establishment understood that certain communications might be politically, scientifically, or institutionally damaging, and allegedly took steps to keep them away from public view. That changes the whole tone of the COVID debate, because for years the official line was not just, "We disagree with you." It was, "You are dangerous for asking." It was not just, "We have better evidence." It was, "Your questions are misinformation." And now the government itself is alleging that some information may have been deliberately hidden. The larger pattern is institutional self-preservation. Agencies rarely wake up in the morning and say, "How do we tell the public the most uncomfortable truth possible?" They say, "How do we protect the mission, protect the reputation, protect the funding, protect the hierarchy, protect the people who know where the bodies are buried?" Metaphorically, of course, though I have learned never to say metaphorically too confidently in Washington. When a bureaucracy feels threatened, transparency becomes a liability, dissent becomes a problem to manage, and public records become something to root around. So yes, Comey is the headline that gets people yelling. But Morens is the story that should make people ask whether the COVID-era information environment was not just mistaken, not just arrogant, but actively managed to keep certain questions outside the approved boundaries.
Daniel, that is the line that hits. FOIA is one of the public's only crowbars. It is not glamorous, it is not flashy, it does not come with a theme song, but it is one of the few tools Americans have to say, hold on, you work for us, show us the record. And when public officials allegedly use private emails, hidden channels, deletion tricks, or backdoor communications to keep records out of public view, that is not just a paperwork problem. That is a trust problem. That is a governance problem. That is the kind of thing that makes regular people say, so when you called us conspiracy theorists, were you actually just mad we were asking for the emails? Now, I want to be careful here, because Morens is presumed innocent, and an indictment is not proof. But the topic itself is absolutely fair game. The DOJ says Morens is accused of participating in a scheme to evade FOIA requests related to COVID-19 research grants. And the AP reported that the case includes allegations involving private email use and hidden or destroyed communications tied to controversial coronavirus research grant discussions. That is serious. And it hits a nerve because millions of Americans lived through the COVID years feeling like they were being managed, not informed. Skylar, I want to bring you in here because you're going to challenge both sides. When conservatives hear this indictment, many are going to say, see, we were right all along. But what do you think the responsible takeaway should be before the evidence is tested in court?
The responsible takeaway is that transparency matters, institutional arrogance is dangerous, and nobody should be above scrutiny. But also that an indictment should not become a permission slip for people to rewrite the entire pandemic with certainty they still may not have. I know that is not the most emotionally satisfying answer, but it is the honest one. If federal officials hid records, evaded public disclosure, or used private communications to avoid accountability, that should be investigated and prosecuted if the evidence supports it. Public health officials had enormous power during COVID. They influenced school closures, business restrictions, vaccine messaging, media narratives, social pressure, and the way dissent was treated. With that kind of power should come radical transparency, not secrecy dressed up as expertise. But I also think conservatives need to be careful not to turn every allegation into a total confirmation of every theory ever posted online. There is a difference between saying, some officials may have hidden records and manipulated transparency, and saying, every public health measure was fake, every scientist lied, and the entire pandemic was a scripted operation. That leap is how you lose people who might otherwise agree with you on accountability. The public deserves answers about COVID origins, research funding, gain-of-function debates, the lab leak theory, censorship pressure, and the way institutions handled uncertainty. But the answers have to come from evidence, not revenge. Because the whole complaint against the public health establishment was that they treated narrative as truth before the evidence was fully debated. So if critics now do the same thing in reverse, they are copying the same mistake with a different political bumper sticker. What should unite people across the spectrum is the principle that government records belong to the public. That should not be left-wing or right-wing. That should not depend on whether you liked Fauci, hated Trump, trusted the CDC, distrusted the NIH, wore 3 masks, refused 1 mask, or spent 2020 wiping down groceries like your bananas had a criminal record. Public records are public records. If officials used private email or deliberate concealment to hide what they were saying about research grants or origins questions, then everyone should want that exposed. Not because it helps one tribe dunk on the other, but because no democracy can function when the people in power decide that transparency is optional when the public might not like what it finds.
Skylar, that's fair. And honestly, it is the point that separates accountability from narrative revenge. Because if the lesson from COVID is that the public was manipulated by certainty, censorship, and institutional arrogance, then the answer cannot be a new certainty, a new censorship, and a new arrogance from the other side. The answer has to be evidence. The answer has to be records. The answer has to be sworn testimony, cross-examination, discovery, court filings, timelines, emails, and enough sunlight that nobody gets to hide behind a title, a lab coat, a cable news green room, or the phrase, "the science has spoken," like it came down from Mount Sinai on Pfizer letterhead. But here is where I land tonight. Americans were not crazy to ask questions. They were not crazy to wonder why certain COVID origin theories were treated like forbidden speech before the debate was settled. They were not crazy to distrust public officials who spoke with absolute confidence one month and revised the guidance the next. They were not crazy to notice that journalists, doctors, scientists, parents, workers, and independent voices were often punished socially or professionally for asking questions that later became acceptable to ask. And when an indictment now alleges that a senior official connected to that world may have concealed records during that same period, people are not crazy for saying, "Hold on, what exactly were you trying to keep from us?" And that brings us back to the Comey side of this story, because both cases are different, but they orbit the same dying star: trust. In the Comey case, people are asking whether political speech is being prosecuted or whether a powerful man is finally being held to a standard ordinary Americans would have faced instantly. In the Morens case, people are asking whether COVID transparency was blocked by insiders who thought the public had no right to see behind the curtain. One case is about speech. One case is about records. One case is loud. One case is technical. But both force the same question: do powerful people live under the same rules as everyone else? And that is why this episode matters, because America cannot survive on selective outrage forever. We cannot have one standard for protesters and another for officials, one standard for parents and another for bureaucrats, one standard for Trump supporters and another for anti-Trump insiders, one standard for podcasters and another for former agency heads. If a regular citizen threatens a president, investigate it. If a former FBI director threatens a president, investigate it. If a regular employee destroys records, prosecute it. If a senior public health official destroys or hides records, prosecute it. But do it cleanly. Do it lawfully. Do it with evidence. Do it with the same standard you would demand if the defendant were someone you liked. Because the country is tired. People are tired of being told the system works while watching the system protect itself. They are tired of being told not to ask questions by people who allegedly had entire side channels to avoid answering them. They are tired of being told words matter only when their side says them, records matter only when their side requests them, and justice matters only when their side controls the press conference. So tonight, the accountability clock is ticking. Not because we want revenge, not because we want show trials, not because we want political enemies paraded around for entertainment, but because a republic cannot function when the people in power treat transparency like a threat, speech like a weapon, and public trust like something they are owed instead of something they have to earn.
Before Artie takes us into final thoughts, let me take just a second to remind everyone why Data and Dissonance exists in the first place. This show was built for people who are tired of being told to sit down, shut up, and accept the official version of reality just because somebody behind a podium says it with confidence. It was built for the people who still believe questions matter. It was built for the people who can smell the spin before the headline even finishes loading. And it was built for the ones who know that truth does not always arrive clean, comfortable, or approved by the people who benefit from keeping you confused. So if tonight's episode has you fired up, if you believe in speaking truth, stirring thought, and supporting independent voices that are not waiting for permission from the same institutions we're talking about tonight, check out the Data and Dissonance merch store. We've got mugs for your morning coffee, hats for your bad decisions, hoodies for your late-night rabbit holes, shirts that say what half the country is thinking, but too many people are afraid to say out loud, and gear built around the same spirit as this show: bold, unapologetic, independent, and just sarcastic enough to get you side-eyed at the grocery store. And don't forget the coffee blends, because if you're going to read indictments, FOIA documents, court filings, and political spin before breakfast, you might as well do it properly caffeinated. Whether you're reaching for High Lake's light roast, Rock Creek medium roast, or Bitterroot dark French roast, there is a blend waiting for whatever level of institutional distrust you woke up with today. High Lakes is for the calm observer. Rock Creek is for the person trying to keep it balanced. Bitterroot is for Brian, who apparently drinks coffee like he's preparing to testify before Congress and fight a raccoon in the same afternoon. Every purchase helps support the show, the books, the music, and the independent creative work behind Data and Dissonance. So visit the merch store, grab something that fits your mood, wear it proudly, sip it loudly, and remember, when the powerful start sweating over records, receipts, and accountability, it is probably a good time to keep asking questions.
Tonight's story is bigger than 2 indictments. It is bigger than James Comey. It is bigger than David Morens. It is bigger than Fauci's inner circle, COVID research grants, Instagram posts, shell arrangements, legal arguments, media spin, or the latest round of cable news emotional interpretive dance. What we are really talking about tonight is the breaking point between the American people and the institutions that spent years demanding trust without consistently earning it. And that is the problem. Trust is not a badge you pin on yourself. Trust is not a job title. Trust is not a government seal, a press conference, a lab coat, a former FBI title, a public health resume, or a Sunday morning interview. Trust is earned by honesty, transparency, consistency, accountability, and the willingness to answer hard questions even when the answers make you look bad. And that is where so many people feel betrayed. During the Trump years, Americans were told the intelligence community was above politics. During COVID, Americans were told the public health bureaucracy was above politics. During censorship debates, Americans were told the experts were simply protecting people from misinformation. During school board fights, border fights, election fights, vaccine fights, lockdown fights, and speech fights, ordinary citizens were told that questioning authority was dangerous, irresponsible, extremist, anti-science, anti-democracy, or some other label cooked up in the same kitchen where they apparently deep-fry hypocrisy and serve it with a side of moral superiority. But now, when indictments start pointing toward powerful insiders, suddenly everyone remembers nuance. Suddenly everyone remembers due process. Suddenly everyone remembers not to jump to conclusions. Suddenly everyone remembers that evidence matters. And listen, they are right. Evidence does matter. Due process does matter. But the reason people are angry is because those protections too often seem to appear only when the protected class needs protecting. That is why the Comey case is complicated. I can think the post was reckless, ugly, and wildly irresponsible, while also saying the government better have a strong case before turning speech into a federal prosecution. I can believe a former FBI director should know better than to post something that millions of people could interpret as a threat, while also recognizing that the First Amendment cannot survive if every administration gets to criminalize hostile symbolism. That is the tension. That is the dissonance. And if we are serious about principles, we have to hold both ideas at once. We do not have to defend Comey's judgment to defend the legal standard. We do not have to like the man to insist that prosecutions be clean. Because once political speech becomes whatever the people in power say it is, everybody loses eventually. Today it may be someone you dislike. Tomorrow it may be you. But the Morens case, to me, cuts even deeper into the trust wound, because it touches the COVID years, and those years changed the country. People lost jobs, kids lost school time, families were divided, businesses were destroyed, churches were closed, funerals were restricted, doctors were silenced, parents were mocked, social media accounts were flagged, and millions of Americans were told that if they questioned official narratives about origins, research, funding, transparency, or uncertainty, they were not just wrong, they were dangerous. So if it turns out that someone inside that system was allegedly hiding records, evading public disclosure, or keeping communications out of reach while the rest of the country was being lectured about trust, that is not some minor bureaucratic housekeeping issue. That is a direct insult to the public. Because the people paid for those agencies, the people lived under those policies, the people absorbed the consequences, and the people had every right to see the records.
And let's be clear, accountability is not revenge.
Accountability is not cheering because the other team finally got hit. Accountability is not turning the DOJ into a revenge machine and pretending that makes us better than the people we criticized. Accountability means the same rules apply, whether your name is famous or forgotten, whether your politics are popular or despised, whether your office has a seal on the door or your paycheck comes from punching a clock. It means if a Trump supporter crosses the line into a real threat, you investigate it. If a Trump critic crosses the line into a real threat, you investigate it. If an ordinary worker destroys government records, you prosecute it. If a senior official hides or destroys government records, you prosecute it. Same rules, same law, same burden, same standard. That is supposed to be the deal. The problem is that a lot of Americans no longer believe that deal exists. They believe there is one America that gets rated and another America that gets invited to explain. One America that gets labeled and another America that gets context. One America that gets censored and another America that gets fact-checked gently by people wearing velvet gloves. One America that is told, you should have known better, and another that says, I didn't mean it that way, and watches the media nod like a golden retriever at a tennis ball. That belief did not appear out of nowhere. It was built one double standard at a time, one hidden email at a time, one dismissive press conference at a time, one smug lecture at a time.
So where do we go from here?
We go to the evidence. We go to the records. We go to the court filings. We go to the testimony. We go to the receipts. We do not surrender our principles just because the target is someone we dislike. We do not pretend allegations are convictions. But we also do not let the word allegation become a magic force field for powerful people who spent years demanding obedience from everyone else. The American people deserve answers. They deserve transparency. They deserve a justice system that is not just strong against the weak and cautious around the connected. And they deserve a media that asks hard questions before the official narrative turns stale and starts smelling like week-old fish in a CNN break room.
At the end of the day,
This episode is about a country trying to figure out whether accountability still exists. Not performance accountability, not partisan accountability, not press release accountability, real accountability. The kind that says power has limits. Records belong to the public. Speech has standards. Prosecutions have burdens. Institutions must answer. And trust must be earned. Because when the people at the top decide they can hide the truth, bend the rules, or play games with the public's right to know, they should not be shocked when the public stops believing them. So tonight, the clock is ticking. For Comey, it is ticking in a courtroom where prosecutors will have to prove that a reckless post was more than reckless. For Morens, it is ticking through records, emails, FOIA requests, and the unanswered questions from the pandemic years. And for the rest of the country, it is ticking on something even bigger. Whether we can still restore enough faith in the system to believe justice is more than a political weapon with a government letterhead.
this has been Data Dissonance.
I'm Artie. Keep asking questions. Keep watching the records. Keep demanding one standard for everyone. And as always, remember to speak truth, stir thought.
Tonight's episode of Data Dissonance is brought to you by the creative world behind the microphone. The stories, the music, the merch, and the independent work that keeps this show moving without asking permission from the same institutions we just spent the episode questioning. First, check out the Caleb Rourke thriller series, including The Covenant Protocol and Black Echo Rising. If you like stories packed with conspiracy, danger, buried secrets, political tension, and one man trying to survive a world where the truth keeps getting people killed, then Caleb Rourke is waiting for you. These books live in the same universe of distrust, pressure, and buried power that fuels this show. Only with more bullets, betrayals, and late-night, "what the hell did I just uncover?" energy. And while you're there, don't forget the music. From gritty rock and grunge-inspired tracks to country, patriotic, and faith-driven songs, the music side of this project carries the same heartbeat. Real people, hard roads, faith, family, frustration, survival, and the fight to keep standing when the world tries to grind you down. Whether it is the heavier edge of Uncaged, the country soul of newer releases, or songs built for the same working-class audience that shows up here every night, the music is part of the mission too. You can find the podcast, the books, the music, the merch store, and every link you need right in the episode description. Support the show, grab the gear, read the books, stream the music, share the episode, and help keep Data and Dissonance growing, one listener, one download, one post, and one truth bomb at a time. Because independent voices only stay independent when the people who believe in them help carry the signal.